Hello, welcome to the Santa Fe Opera. My name is Michael Ortiz, I'm the technical director here, and I'm joined by my colleagues Lutz and Missy West. And we're here today to talk to you about the design process and how a production here at the Santa Fe Opera makes it from the initial concept to the stage. So many of you over the years have asked, how do I get to design at the Santa Fe Opera? And today we're here to tell you what that process is about.
It's not us.
Yeah, unfortunately it's not us. We don't get to make that decision. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with us, we work in a rotating repertory, and part of the process of working in a rotating repertory is that we do a lot of really long-term planning here at this company. At the moment, I would say we solidly know what the next 2 to 3 seasons are. Does that sound right to you guys?
That's about right.
More or less.
Yeah.
And
That's what we budgeted for.
more long range, the company has at least a rough plan of what productions would be done in the next 5 years. So very interesting the way that we work compared to some of the more regional theater models or even colleges, universities, and community theaters where they may not know what they're doing, less than 3 months before a production is to open. So the first topic we wanted to talk about was choosing the rep, the director of the design team, how that's done. All that is usually done through our artistic department, who's helping develop a repertory based on the history of the company and what the wants and needs are of the general public who would attend as patrons.
And I would say availability of artists that they want to have sometimes has an influence on that.
I agree.
And also they have to be contracted out early, so that's why we actually work ahead.
Yeah.
Oftentimes the singers are 2 years or 3 years contracted.
As much as 5 sometimes. So, and that has an impact on what you're going to do, who's going to be available. And in our situation now where it's 2020, being able to just pick up a season and put it in the next season is, it's complicated by that because the artists aren't necessarily available because they have other contracts already signed.
So after a production has been chosen and potentially artists who we would like to sing those roles have been contracted, the company goes about choosing a director. In the case of what Randy's got sitting in front of me, we have La Boheme. So how do you decide who you want to direct La Boheme? In this case, this show was directed by Mary Birnbaum, and I would say as far as what the three of us knew, we knew that Mary was going to direct probably 2 to 3 years out from opening. Does that sound?
2 years anyway.
2 years, I think, yeah.
2 years.
2 years out.
Yeah. So the company would contract a director, and once the director is chosen, they're asked, who would you like to work on this project with? And there becomes, to me, the big sticking point that always seems to shock you all as apprentices is that the choice of designers has virtually zero to do with a direct relationship between a designer and a company, and more so about the relationship between a director and a designer.
Yeah,
And
with the occasional exception, but typically that's what it is. And if a designer isn't available for a director, they might ask the company for recommendations.
yeah. And then they pair them up as a team.
So I think, contrary to what most folks would think, that the relationship between a designer and a company is important. For us, it's really more about your relationship with designers and how they perceive you and your work, and how your work relates to their artistic vision and how they like to work on a production. You guys want to add anything else to?
Well, that team was a new team for us. It was their first time to actually work here as a director and designer, although they had worked together often. And they had a great working relationship, which was great to have. That makes our process a little easier if they have a good working relationship and they understand how each other works and the requirements. For the director still has pretty much the say of what the concept is.
Yes.
And then the scenic designer actually fleshes that out.
Right, creates that environment. In the case of the Bohème, the costume designer is actually primarily a set designer. So, not that there hadn't been costumes done before, but that made it a little bit interesting because sometimes you'll have a designer that isn't as comfortable with that world as with perhaps something else, some other media that they do. But in this case, it worked out really, really well. We had a good working relationship with that designer who, as you said, has a good relationship with the director. They could talk to each other really easily. But before we got to that, after the director sets the time period and what it's going to be, is it fantastical? Is it realistic? All of that then has to come together and they figure out what it's going to be, and that's when we see the preliminary presentation of the designs.
We have already budgeted probably at least a year and a half before that.
Yeah.
Not knowing what the design is a trick and a sort of a skill. But we do go back to the libretto and the word to help us with our budgeting. And then we come to the table with that budget, which gets approved by our production director and administration. And so we are sort of the first, this team, presenting that to the designers often and the director as far as the budget and will we be able to actually do their vision, make their vision within the budget.
Yeah, because you probably, Mike, because you are the sets, you get started before any of us do too. So you want to talk a little bit about what that negotiation period is? Like when we see the preliminary, then where do you go?
Yeah, so I guess to talk about, the preliminary concept meeting, that's usually happening about a year to 14, 16 months before production would open. At that meeting, we might get a variety of different things regarding the show. Anywhere from what looks like a fully completed design to, a pile of napkin sketches and ideas, to be truly honest. And it's, our job to take those ideas and interpret them and decide if they would feasibly work on our stage. One of the first things that I particularly look for is at the sight lines. If we put this production on our stage, is the entire audience going to be able to see what's going on?
I think that's important for any theater.
I agree.
You start with it, and our sight lines can be difficult.
And I think many theaters surprisingly have really difficult sightline issues.
Right. Yeah, and I think some of that gets down to your ticket buyers that don't want obstructed vision or want to sit. It also means that the price of those tickets is going to be a little bit less because it's obstructed vision or because it's at such an obtuse angle that you don't really see the whole stage. So you want and you want your audience to see the design. I mean, the goal of what we do is to put the designer and the director's vision on that stage. It's not our job to judge it. It's not our job to say it's good or bad. It's our job to work it out.
Right, and I think that's a really important aspect of what the three of us do, is that the three of us aren't here to play art police. The three of us are really here to police the design in a way that what we're doing is corralling in the ideas and the expectations and helping designers to flesh out their ideas in a way that's conducive to the production and helping to make that the most successful interpretation of their original vision.
Right. So I would say that in all of that, time and budget are our two biggest umbrellas that we have to work within. Time to get it done, time, and all of that involves things like shipping. You have to know when you're shipping something like steel versus shipping something like maybe some styrofoam, your cost difference is going to be greater, your time difference in getting your materials is going to be greater. So all of that goes into the process of negotiating with the designer, because you may need, they may want a certain thing, but you can't get it in time or you can't get it in the budget. But beyond time and budget, then we have things like, especially the set guys have to work with, because it's a rep. And things have got to come in and go out. And all of us have to do a rep because everything has to change out, but probably Scenic has got the biggest job.
Right. So I guess we've kind of wandered a little, but going back to the preliminary presentation, those are all the kinds of things that we're taking into consideration when we look at a set of ideas for the first time.
Right.
And part of that is going to be negotiating with both the director and the designer about not necessarily their artistic choices, but how that's going to be implemented on stage. And again, helping, really acting as a consultant to the director designer team about how to best achieve their artistic vision. And then go ahead and negotiating with them about, okay, you've created this fantastical world with all these places and things that are going to be in it, but realistically we're confined by the constraints of a budget as well. So helping directors and designers to establish their priorities, what they really need to make their production tell the story that they want to tell.
And oftentimes that's a real bartering, trying to give them what they need to produce their vision, but also the reality of will it be able to change over in time, and give them all those reality checks in that first presentation. Right. Is really an important fact.
Yeah.
It's really big, and in a lot of cases, because of the rep and because of the distance between our stage and the storage facility that scenery will have to travel, for me in the scenery, talking about scenery, the first thing that we immediately say is, how many casters are we going to have to put on this to get it from point A to point B? And realistically, here at the Santa Fe Opera and in many repertory situations, that immediately takes a huge chunk of the budget, in ways that I think we as theater practitioners, including myself, frequently forget, how much wheels cost.
Yeah. Fortunately, in costume, we don't have to purchase a lot of wheels.
We do, but not as much as scenery. So that is a big factor, actually.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that we often, in the first presentation, is how will it rehearse? Will the scenery need to go to rehearsal? And it's important for the director to know that up front, what they'll get or what they're going to request. And in the first presentation, that's something that I know I talk about.
Or will we have to create a second set of rehearsal scenery or rehearsal props, rehearsal costumes,
Right.
all things that will affect the final performance.
And the budget.
And the budget.
And the budget.
And the budget.
Because that's coming out of your budget. If you're having to build rehearsal items, whatever they may be, that's coming out of your budget. So it's coming out of the designer's budget. So the designer has to understand that, especially if you're doing something fantastical like with costumes, you need something for rehearsal that behaves the way that the real thing is going to behave. And so that has to come, that's time and that's money that's coming out of a designer's budget, and they need to know that up front. So that's another part of the discussion when we're doing the preliminary negotiations.
And I think, I feel like this all sounds super overwhelming, but I mean, it's one of those things that, our collective years of experience have really taught us to look for from the early onset.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and every theater and every stage is going to be different. All of those things about timings and those sorts of things. Every theater is going to be different, and our theater, because of its physical situation, and which we'll talk about a little later, that's all part of that initial discussion, because the set designer needs to know what our stage is like.
Yeah,
And it's outdoors.
And it's not just sending some, I mean, they often come and visit, do a site visit.
right.
They
That's
do.
exactly what I was about to say. Is I think we skipped over the fact that about a year prior, we usually have a site visit with a director and a designer. Usually during the season that's prior to their show, so that
They can see a
They
show
can-
on stage.
they can see what a show on stage looks like. They might even be here for a whole week and see a number of shows on stage.
Is it a year or 2 years?
It's 2 years.
It's 2
It's
years.
about 2
It's 2
years,
years
18,
out.
yeah.
Yeah, because they really need to know.
Right.
Especially if they're new to the theater.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, a director or designer who's worked here before may or may not come out to see, how things work. They may also come to see, what style of productions we've done recently, so that their concepts aren't too closely aligned with something that's been done in recent memory.
Yeah. And the quality of what we do.
Yeah.
I think it helps them to see what we can accomplish, although because we're tech people, we get it done, and that sometimes is a problem because we know we can do it, but again, we have time and budget constraints. So there's that.
And the artistic team, the administration, they're also watching to see what the season looks like together, like
Right.
all 5 shows.
Yeah.
We've had a couple seasons where the designs looked very similar, either in color or shape and look, and we had to go back to the drawing board with the director and designer to change one of the designs, and that happens in a preliminary.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think Randy really touched on one of the key points to working in a rep is that, we're doing 5 productions that are all going to be seen together potentially in a 5-day period. And in the case, like most theaters where you have a subscriber base who might have bought tickets for all 5 productions, they're probably hoping they're not going to see 5 productions that all look kind of similar to each other.
Yeah.
And that's important. I mean, what we all do is supported by our ticket buyers and our donors.
Yeah, we have general directors of other companies from all over the world come to see what we're doing, because that's potential rental probably, or they're listening to singers that they have an interest in, or they just want to see what we're doing, because we have a very large group of people who are just really interested in what the Santa Fe Opera produces
And I think-
and how we do it.
I think that really touches on the hallmark of our industry as a whole, that possibly the most important thing that you as apprentices here or any of us as industry professionals can develop is our relationships with each other. I think it's really important to remember that the folks that you meet and work with while you're young in your career end up being your colleagues for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
And friends.
And
And-
friends
yeah.
and
Yeah.
your saviors when
Yeah.
I
Play
mean,
nice.
play nice, exactly. I mean, one of the great things, and I've been here 41 years, is that I love the people I work with. We support each other. And that happens in the presentation too. We look at like, who's gonna build that? Who is gonna pay for it? Who's gonna have the labor? And the great thing about here is that we work that out between us, figuring all that out.
Yeah.
And that is a great thing about working here.
Yeah. Yeah, I think following the preliminary presentation that that is going to happen, we then go to other departments, because other departments, we don't work alone, and it's not just other production departments. It's the music department, it's the administration, artistic, finance department. All of those have a say and have influence on how the productions go, how many people are being cast in it, you know, so how many people are going to be on the stage in a certain scene with this much scenery on there, this much props on there, and if their costumes are really huge, you know, is everybody going to be able to get on there? So we start having those conversations, not just amongst ourselves, which I think we do really easily, and as they were saying, having good colleagues is really important. And we're lucky enough that we work physically in the same complex, we're on the same campus, so we can talk to each other easily, you know, when we're around, and we all are open to listening to each other to figure those kinds of things out. But there are other departments that come into play when we're working with those preliminary designs to try to figure out, because from there we're going to have to see if we have to shift our budget. Do we need more? Can we cut? It's all that kind of stuff.
So lighting is the one team that's actually not here in the winter, and that affects both my department and Mike's department.
Yeah.
And my department.
Oh yeah, true.
And the lighting, depending on the design, might be really important. I mean,
Yeah.
we might get big giant walls and they're too tall, or they're in the way, or they're gonna obstruct, you know, key lighting shots, which in our building, you know, our lighting sources are fixed. We work with the rep plot, and how well are we gonna be able to illuminate not only the scenery, but the singers who are performing in front of them, of this,
Yeah.
of that.
And changes in technology have changed the way that we've had to operate, like, you know, working with projections and the changes in the way projections work,
Right.
and the way that all of that stuff then looks on stage.
Yeah,
Yeah.
big change.
Fabrics, color,
Paint,
all of that stuff.
texture.
Yeah, all of that stuff. The lighting has a really important role to play. And they are included in the preliminary, in the design presentations. It's not just the three of us, it's everybody. Paint charge comes,
Yeah.
AV will be there. There might be, you know, we might be having to mic stuff. So the sound department, AV department has to, we would have to work with them because of mic packs or shifts during a, you know, like an intermission, maybe we have to change mics out or something like that, which impacts how much time you have backstage getting people ready, or the complication of the costume might, you know, be coming into play in that. So every department has to work together, and like you said, we have enough experience to know when we need to go ask somebody that question. It's important to be able to feel comfortable to do that. And get that sort of information.
I think, just to kind of summarize, I think really the preliminary presentation ends up being just as, if not possibly even more important than a final design for us, in that, you know, we're trying to help these teams iron out the kinks in their concepts prior to them investing a whole lot of time putting together a final design package.
Right. It's a time saver too, because by the time they get to the final, which is often in August, or that kind of time period, we're getting ready to start on it. So at the final presentation, we're like ready to go. But if we haven't seen the final, you know, if in the preliminary, there's been a big change between the preliminary and then the next step, which typically for our company is the final design, then you've got to go back, you've got to back up a little bit and do some of these steps we've just talked about. You've got to go back into negotiation to figure stuff out. And that happens sometimes. Different for different departments.
In the moving from the preliminary to the final presentation, in between there's a lot of paperwork. There's lots of drawings. There's that need to be provided, especially by the final presentation, because that is going to be our final look. One for the budget, two for the labor, and what materials we're going to need. And so when that's presented in the final presentation, it's sort of locked there. It's sort of locked in at that moment. That's not to say that we couldn't speak up and say, I don't think we can make that shift, or
yeah, if there's
we
a
can't
big, if
build
there's
that.
a big change, then we have to go back and talk that through with finance and production and everybody, and the board. You know, don't forget that the board is kind of looks out over everything to see if it's going to be okay. But the artistic department, you know, they'll let us know.
And ultimately, I think the artistic department really drives the boat about what the overall look of any particular show or any particular season is.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's an arc to the way they choose that rep. You know, typically you want something a little more lighthearted. Oftentimes we do world premieres, and that makes a big difference when you're looking at design presentations, because it's never been done. You know, in the back of your head, if you've done Barber of Seville, or you've done Eugene Onegin, or you've done, you know, any of that,
Yeah.
Figaro, any of those, you know what the plot is. There's a libretto, there's a score, and so you have a sense of when the scene changes are and what's happening. Is the chorus on stage here? Is it just the principals? But when you do a world premiere, oftentimes we don't have a libretto when we first budget.
It's true.
So we don't have any way of knowing what it is, and then we'll often get a libretto before we get a score, and sometimes they're able to record some of the rehearsal. I guess their rehearsals.
They do like a
sing-through.
Workshops.
Yeah.
And we can hear those recordings, and that helps us. But until we hear from the director what it is we're going to do, what time period we're going to be in, we really don't know. We're kind of driving blind with world premieres, and Santa Fe does a number of them. They've done about 17, 18 of them
Yeah.
Sounds about right.
in the past. So that's part of who we are, is doing that.
It's
doing
part of
that.
our mission.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you touched on something important too, Missy, particularly as it pertains to, you know, opera mainstays. Is, you know, yes, we have an idea of how the show itself works, what the nuts and bolts are, but I think one of the bigger challenges for us is not letting our preconceived notions of productions that we've done in the past, you know, steer, well, both not letting and allowing them to.
Right, having an expectation
Right.
of something, it's not fair to the designers.
Right.
But it does help to know kind of what's going on.
Right, especially when it, you know, looking further down the road when it comes to timings of scene changes or things that we're being asked to accomplish with costume change, or, you know, we have to move 27 chairs and 12 tables off the stage in 30 seconds. Is that something that we can actually achieve?
Right,
And will it change in rehearsal?
yeah.
I mean,
Then there's that.
there's the world premieres. Oftentimes, the whole scene or act will change from what we thought it might be as far as rehearsal.
Yeah, they might move the music around.
That is
We
true.
just don't know.
And so it's always interesting doing a world premiere or a new work. And the libretto usually changes like 2 or 3 times from when we first read the libretto to when we actually get to the final presentation. The libretto's probably changed and been edited.
Mm-hmm. And a number of times when we've worked on world premiere productions, you know, the show gets into the rehearsal hall and they realize, oh, that scene change that we really want to make, we need to add some music or we need to add some dialogue.
Right.
So it is a collaborative process.
Yeah. And the other caveat is that you can read the libretto and you can read the score, but until you get to rehearsal, like you're saying, you really don't know who's on that stage. So there's certain people singing and you know about that, but what if they decide that they want, you know, half the chorus because they're townspeople to be on the stage? And until really you get to rehearsal, if they haven't dealt with that in the design presentations, and that's a big question to always ask, who's on that stage? Are people there that aren't singing? Because a director often will have sort of an idea, but not always, and the rehearsal process is just that. It's rehearsal and figuring it out. And a world premiere is often, you just have to stay flexible and stay in good communication with your designer, because they're the ones that are primarily talking to the director. So having that good relationship, I think for any of our departments, it's really key.
Really important.
So you can't alienate them, in other words, because your goal is to do their vision. That's our goal. Our goal is to get it on that stage and to get it the way that they want to see it. And that's what we do, and we like doing it, and we're proud of doing it.
One of the things that I think is, once the designer trusts us to know, because when there's a new designer, a new director, you know, they haven't really worked with us, they don't know how we work, they don't know our
Yeah.
we have a pretty high standard, I think. All of us that are
Well, I know I do.
I do too. And you know, they don't know from other companies whether or not they're going to get that. And so it's important to establish that trust and relationship because it makes things so much easier.
It's true.
It definitely does. I mean, I can speak for myself with designers who have worked here over the years. You know, it's great to have that working relationship, and that when you call and you ask a question, and I think Randy and I's favorite response is, "Oh, you know what I like."
Yeah. Yeah. And
I trust you.
Yeah, they do. Or they know that if something's going really astray, you know, look-wise or something, they know that we'll speak up and say, that's probably not going to look too great, or
Right.
And it's a great working relationship in that. But you have to gain that trust first.
Yeah.
And you have a very quick and short time to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And you have to, they need to be able to trust that you know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So having some experience and being able to say, well, you know, that fabric that you picked out is $150 a yard. And if we get that, then we're going to have to cut somewhere else, which is part of that keeping an eye on the budget thing. And this is part of the negotiation that happens throughout the whole design process. But you can, you know, if you know your stuff, then you can offer a substitute, offer, you know, a different way to do it that will get them what they're after. Because whatever they're after might be subtle, and there's a lot of ways you can do that. So learning as much as you can about how to accomplish your area is really important in order to garner the trust of your designer and the directors, so that they feel comfortable handing over this project to you. Because like Randy pointed out, they may have had some bad experiences, and
It's true.
and we just want to do what we do and do it well.
one of the huge parts of our input is because we're outdoors, the wind is a huge factor. And they don't know that if they haven't worked here before. They don't realize
Or
what the
have
wind
never worked
does.
outside at all.
That's
That's
correct.
true.
And you sort of get pushback sometime when you say, we get 50-mile-an-hour winds, we get a 40-mile-an-hour wind, that's going to blow away.
Right, which sounds, excessive or unreasonable until you've worked here and you realize, no, that is the case.
That's
50 mile an hour sustained winds is a real thing.
Yeah, and rain,
And rain.
and the monsoons that are here. An outdoor theater always has its challenges, and we are no different. The stage is covered, and there is a back wall to it that opens and closes, so you can actually see the hills of New Mexico, and sometimes that's used as part of the scenery. And that's it's like a wind tunnel. And you have to, and it's not just building props out of steel
No.
and building set pieces that can hold up, and casters good enough to lock down. But we have to weight costumes so that they're not like blowing all over the place. You do something from 1860, it could blow right up in your face. So there are a lot of challenges. It's not just wind, it's also rain, it's also altitude and dryness here. We have a lot of things that the environment itself comes to bear because we are an outdoor theater. The heat of the summer, even though it's dry, it's still hot. So there are lots of challenges with that.
And I think, that the wind and the weather are one of the things we have to catch right away. I mean, early on in the presentation. Even though they don't want to hear, well, you probably won't want to do that. That is something you have to put on the table right away, because it sort of can blow up.
Literally.
Literally blow up.
Or blow it over.
As if they rehearse into it and they haven't considered the wind, or they're trying to do a 40 by 40 silk cloth in the wind and work with the dancers. That's going to be a challenge for them. So that is something that we have to catch early, so that we don't get too far into the process, because then we're sort of locked in, and we have to come up with a solution.
And you don't want stuff blowing into the orchestra pit.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely not.
That's, there's a lot to consider, because I say that kind of jokingly, but it is true. If you've got a raked stage and something blows over and the wind is strong enough and the object is light enough, it could very well be blown down stage. And we have to consider all of that. Hats, feathers, for me.
Letters.
Big dresses. Oh yeah, just paper, ephemera
We have to
stuff.
weight so many things. We have to weight, any table skirt has to be weighted and underskirted. So there's a lot, because that increases the labor. It also increases the material.
Yeah, the costs of just, I don't want to say coping, but addressing the wind situation for what we do, especially when you, again, going back to factoring in the fact that all of this stuff has to be mobile because it has to come to and from the stage.
Right. Yeah. So talk a little bit about that, Mike, about the challenges of rep with an outdoor theater.
Well, and the way that our particular rep is structured, we may see as many as 3 different shows on the stage in a 24-hour period.
Rehearsal time happens.
Right, so, a typical day here would probably start about 7:30 a.m. with preparing the stage for a daily staging rehearsal in the peak of the season. Sweeping, mopping, getting everything set, just so for whatever the rehearsal needs are for the day. The rehearsal itself typically starts about 9:30. And that rehearsal would go all the way to about 3 o'clock with a lunch break in there somewhere. So facilitating all the needs of that production during the day, which could take, Randy, sometimes some of those rehearsals have, 20 bodies in them just to
Oh, yeah.
facilitate the needs of the rehearsal. And we're just strictly talking about technical needs. We're not even talking about performers, directors, designers that would be in attendance to that.
And those people are doing what, Mike? They're moving the furniture for scene changes?
Moving furniture, moving scenery, depending on what the needs of a particular show are, they might be moving instruments and setting up,
That's right.
different things. There may be, a bonda that needs to play from off stage that they need to set for.
Right. And that's just on stage, because we have 3-4 other rehearsal spaces where shows are also being rehearsed that also need bodies to help
Right.
during the rehearsal process when we're sort of at the peak of that. But
Think of that, and to be honest, quite frankly, it's usually the same set of bodies, and they're all trying to be in multiple places at once.
right.
Um,
But going back to the stage where you might have 3 shows on a stage.
Right, so that show might rehearse until about 3, sometimes 4 o'clock. At that point, we would do a full changeover of the stage, which the way
And
that,
props.
and the props, and costumes, if there was costume
Rehear-
pieces
yeah,
that were part of the rehearsal
costumes,
process.
yeah.
And the way we're set up here is that all has to happen in a 3-hour window. So everything that we do here has to be designed to come to or leave the stage in 90 minutes or less. So in that 3-hour window, we will turn around all these elements of a production that was rehearsing. We'd then get the stage set for a lighting focus for the evening's activity. That focus happens in 90 minutes or less. You then would have time to open the house, get an audience settled. Our performances here start at 8 o'clock. 8:30. They start at 8:30 at the beginning of the season, and
House usually comes an hour before,
right.
roughly.
Yeah. But sometimes there might be, like, something may be on stage for rehearsal, but then, like, the paints or somebody, or you guys, might need a different set on stage that's sort of plugged in the middle. So you do end up with sometimes 3 different shows on the stage in less than 24 hours.
That's true.
And when we get to performance, that really has to be settled and done, but we're still, when the first couple of shows open, we're still working on shows. So there's a lot of stagecraft that still has to happen. And sometimes even after a performance, they have to turn over, and the lighting department may have to stay to do tech on a different show.
It's true.
And then at 4 o'clock in the morning, they'll move that out and put on a set that for the next
For the next
morning's
morning.
rehearsal.
Right.
So-
So I think our human resources are really our most valuable asset here, because what we do here at the Santa Fe Opera really takes a large village to get everything done.
Yeah, it truly does. And that means, again, you have to work together with people. So play nice.
And that includes changing out the pit,
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
which,
yeah.
that's no easy feat.
No, because
Mm.
every show's got a different size orchestra, different instruments. And that's music services that the TD oversees. So that's even more people. We have, the shops are working, but in addition to the shops are the people who are the run crews.
Right.
So that's another group of people. Sometimes there's a little overlap, but it's certainly not always, and not all the people. And so there are techs that happen, and leading up to the opening night of the season, where in a typical year, we're teching, well, these guys are teching all the time. They start teching really early, but once dress rehearsal starts for us, then for those first 2 shows, we're in dress rehearsals for 10 days leading up to the first performance. And that's also one of those times where a show goes on at midnight, it comes off, lighting tech is still happening. So it is exhausting, and if you don't have a lot of people you get worn, just, you know, you get worn out.
And you don't have very much time for notes in between.
No.
I mean, sometimes it's overnight. Lately, we've been getting a little bit more, at least a day in between, trying to get all the notes done for the next dress rehearsal. But that's also a challenge, and it takes quite a few bodies and labor to get those notes done.
Yeah.
And I think all this goes to say that, you know, the preliminary design is really the time where we want to work through the largest amount of potential issues that could arise based on a concept.
Right, right. Because you're trying to figure out how long it's going to take to build it. So, and that's gonna also let you know, well, how many people do you need to hire? Because when you work in rep, you've got these couple of different types of crews, running crews, but you've also got your manufacturing crews. And how many people is that going to take?
And do you need to hire specific specialized skill sets to accomplish some of these ideas that are being proposed?
Right. And in the hiring, you're also trying to figure out, well, do you have to have stuff manufactured off campus? You know, during the winter, what is that window like? And how does that figure into your budget?
And how large does the crew need to be? I mean,
right.
you know, that changes every year.
Every show.
Every show. Some years, you know, we know it's going to be a huge build, and so we would have to hire more craftspeople and carpenters and start earlier.
Right.
But it may be a big show to run. And so then we would look at how many people we need to, in props and scenery and costumes.
And costumes, the number of artists.
And so the number of people we hire changes annually, pretty much.
Yeah. And show to show, like for us, for example, if we are doing a show that has no chorus in it, of course we need fewer dressers that night. But then we might do a show that's got 50-some chorus, and it's got supers, and it's got dancers, and you've got principals. So you would need your full complement of people to be in on that night. And so that all has to be scheduled in and figured out. And that doesn't include the people who are still in the shop building costumes for that next show that's going to come up in tech.
Right, or working on notes for something that had been in tech the night before.
Exactly.
That's right.
Exactly. And that's that's why it really does take a village. And that's why I think working at this company, the communication that we have between our departments, because we can easily just check in with each other about some note that I got that I know is going to affect props, or some note that I got that I need to talk to the TD about in terms of the door. We can't get through that doorway. You know, what can we do?
Right.
You know, or the step up is
ripping the
too
costume.
hard. Yeah, or
The stairway's not wide enough to accommodate the costume that needs to come down it.
She's wearing heels.
it's
and
all
she can't
about the
come down
costumes. Let me tell you, it's all about the costumes. But we do, but you know, and I have to say that at this company, that is an easy thing to accomplish, is to talk to each other. And I think as anybody goes forward in their career, that's something to remember, that it's not one thing that's out there on the set. It's not just a singer. It's not just a singer and an orchestra. It's opera, which means that it's sets and it's costumes and it's props and it's sound and it's the paint department,
Lighting.
and it's
Stage management.
Stage management. At this company, they're connected to the artistic department, but we have to work hand in glove with them because they're wrangling the rehearsals and all of that scheduling. So
And they really are our first line of defense to help control anything that could become a much larger issue further down the line.
yeah,
So I think, you know, to back this process up, we've done all this planning and negotiating and forward thinking. So typically between, you know, that preliminary presentation to final designs, we might be looking at as much as a year in time period. We might be looking at as little as a few months in that time period.
Yeah,
3 months.
or 1
right.
month.
So, I mean, in our most ideal world, and we always try to meet that ideal, is that we would have final designs in hand somewhere between 14 and 10 months prior to opening,
Yeah,
on average, I would say.
yeah,
So I think, you know, talking about expectations for a final design, what we're expecting from a design team, you know, it's funny, every time we get a final design, I think back to college, like many of you are still at, and thinking how annoying it was when your professor said, you know, a final design consists of this, this, that, and also this, this, and that, and also that, that, and that. And, you know, I remember being a student thinking, God, that's an awful lot. This assignment is way out of hand. And then to now be on the other side of the table and really thinking about, I need more than a ground plan to make this happen, guys.
yeah. That professor forgot to tell you that you need these other things too.
Right.
Yeah.
Um,
Our reality is that we are reality. And we're not a college professor, we're not parents. We are people who run professional shops and have professional expectations and standards that need to be met. And it's not just what we as individuals want. We have people who are paying money to sit in the seat of our theater, who have come to Santa Fe, which most of those people don't live around here. And so it's our job to present a really good product and to work really hard. And so we have these really great situations where people can learn a lot if they are open to learning a lot.
well, and the first person to usually do some of that learning is the designer when they turn in something and we ask, well, what about X, Y, and Z that we really need in order to help you achieve your best vision?
Right.
And ultimately, you know, a completed final design is a presentation of everything that should be expected to help us achieve that vision and do it most efficiently. Efficiently?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, efficiently.
I would say that this situation we're all in with COVID-19 has definitely affected my ability to speak.
Well, COVID brain.
Yeah.
You should also know that the designers and the directors are contracted. They're brought into an agreement. What they will provide and what they need to provide is also part of their contract.
And on a time frame.
And on a time frame, correct.
Yeah. And that's what we need them to stay on time because of our time frame, because of the budget that we have. And if it starts to have to expand or we get constricted, then we have to add more labor, or we have to, you know, the labor we have has to go into more overtime. So it's really important in that going from that preliminary through the negotiation period into the final, and then to begin the manufacturing of for each of our departments. It's really important that we stay on a schedule if we want to stay in a good budget area.
Right, and I would say that for all of us, the single biggest commodity that there is nothing that we can do to increase is time.
That's correct.
I mean, from the time a final design is turned in to the time it hits the stage, that number is set, and the number of bodies that we have to accomplish any given project is usually pretty constrained as well, because there's a humane number of hours to keep people
Right.
on campus in any given day.
Yeah. Yeah, we have to consider labor law and
Personal safety,
personal safety.
quality of work that you get from any employee.
And the opening night of a show is not going to move. that is
That's
a deadline that we have to work toward. So we have to work from that backwards.
Right.
Because we don't have the option of moving the opening at all.
And one of the other, I think, important things for, at least in props, that we need from the last or final presentation is we need the prop list from the director and the designer together so that they have talked. Because we have to actually provide a month in advance all the rehearsal props. And so that final presentation is huge for us in props because we have to think about getting 4 weeks before the show opens into rehearsal. And that also, you know, that really changes how we hire and what we need to build for the rehearsal, you know, process.
I mean, you guys want to touch base on about how far out from an opening night, you know, you might start construction? I mean, for us, depending on the year and the situation, we might actually start construction principally of a production 12 months prior to its opening.
Yeah.
That's
Ours is usually about 9.
Ours is usually,
9 months.
well, we start with fabric, you know, getting down to the nitty gritty of what the fabric is going to be in the fall prior to the next summer's openings. So we're probably about 8-9 months out of gathering up the materials. But while we're doing that, we're also working with the designer and figuring out the schedule. Are we going to build it all here on campus? Do I need to contract out to outside makers? And then what are our like shipping times involved? Are we doing anything like really weirdly special? So I have to hire somebody, you know, a specialty employee to do that particular thing. And then we start on campus. The last couple of years we've started with an early team in about March that starts building groups of stuff, and then people start coming in shifts. So by the middle of May, towards the end of May, when the apprentices arrive, then everybody's here. But they've come in waves, and we figure out the schedule according to that for the costume department.
so kind of circling back to what our expectations are out of a final design. You know, speaking from a scenery standpoint, I would hope to have received, at the bare minimum, a ground plan, a set of elevations of any walls that would need to be built, which, you know, I think that's the bare minimum. Ultimately, you know, we're going to need information about what the finishes are, what the fit is. We here at the Santa Fe Opera require that a model be turned in, and at the bare minimum it should be a full color model, or it could be a white model with colored elevations for each of the elements. You know, a full drafting package to support anything that needs to be communicated. And then from there, we would take that package of information and we would break it down further to create construction drawings in my office. Myself and the assistant technical director would do construction drawings, and we would liaise with the master carpenter in that process about, you know, how things are going to get built on the shop floor in order to, you know, make it to the stage. We'd probably also be having conversations with the scenic charge artist about what their needs are. You know, we talked about the challenges of outdoor theater and building durable goods that can withstand the rigors of not only the outdoors but the rep. So we might go about things in a completely different process here than you would do with an indoor theater. And, you know, just because a final design is turned in doesn't mean we're done having conversations or negotiations with our directors and designers.
Yeah. Sometimes that starts it, but
It might.
Well, there's discovery, don't you think?
There's
Yeah,
definitely
there's
a period
definitely.
of discovery.
As you're
There
working
is.
things through, and even as you're actually building, there's discovery of either a mistake, or it just could be something's come out of rehearsal that's gonna change things, and
Right, I mean, we're all human, we're not infallible. There are things that, we do overlook or didn't account for.
yeah, usually it's something that isn't accounted for because sometimes we don't have all the information. Or it changes in rehearsal,
Yeah.
or, something just happens.
Right, I
And
mean-
we have to go back and rebuild something, or dye it, or repaint it because of what's happening with lighting.
Right,
And sometimes we don't discover that until first dress rehearsal.
it's true.
So,
Yep, that's great.
And, I mean, we're talking about how long our timeline really is to make it from a concept to something that sees the stage. Someone's life experiences or what's happening in the world around them could drastically influence
yeah,
what their initial concept was to the time that, we get to an audience.
that's true. Life happens.
And
It does.
right now, it feels like we're all experiencing a lot of life.
Yeah, exactly. The world has changed.
But yeah, I mean, for costumes, we like to have a real costume plate. It can be something that is drawn, or something that's a collage of different kinds of media. But and it's nice to have research, because it's good to be able to see where the concept's coming from, like this costume and these kinds of things. But what we need to know all that stuff. We need to know color. We need to know texture. We need to know, well, what time of year is it? All of those things have an impact on what you're then going to choose in terms of fabrics, techniques that you may need. Is there beading? Is there ombre dyeing? Is there painting?
Tailoring.
Is there tailoring versus draping? And what's up with millinery? So, are these things distressed? All of that takes time. So what we need, like for the final, we really need it final. And if I can have a back view, I'm happy as can be. Just so I know what's going on, because people aren't paper dolls and they don't just walk around on the stage with the front. So there's a lot that you have to have conversation about, because many designers don't do all of that. And they don't give you all the designs at the final presentation, and that is frustrating, but it does happen. And so you have to keep up that conversation.
I mean, one of the responsibilities of the designer for us in props is that any major prop that needs to be built, we have a drawing for, and all the research, so that I can figure out the schedule to get it done. And so in a final presentation, hopefully all of the research for the major props are in that packet with the prop list. And oftentimes it affects the scenery
Absolutely.
and costumes, actually.
Yeah.
And so it is important.
You got to make sure that chair is big enough for
That's
that
right.
dress.
It's true.
Or that we have the fabrics are not fighting each other, or
Yeah,
and that's
yeah.
happened.
And sometimes you don't see that until lighting happens.
That's right.
Right, or, we might, the scenery, the properties, and the costumes might all share a common color, and we look at them either in a room like this, where we're looking at a design, or in any of the shops, and they all match up in the shops, and we get them under stage light, and suddenly we have three very different colors that
Yeah,
do not play well together.
yeah, yeah.
And the other thing about the final presentation is that after that presentation, we sit down and we figure out the who, what, where, and who's going to build, what the overlap props are, and there are always overlap costume props. There's always overlap in scenery, like if we're going to build trees,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and that's when we really figure it out. And so we need that part of the process to be as complete as it can be, so that we can start making those decisions.
Right, and it's not clear show to show to show.
Right.
Because in the overlap that's between props and costumes, we might have, one time, we might need to build the bandoliers or the holsters or whatever, because it's gotta work with the costume. But other times, it might be that props has gotta deal with it because of what they have to do with it. So it's not cut and dried, and sometimes I might have more budget and be able to absorb it, and because of something that's come up in the props department. So we're always looking for ways to just make it easier over the whole show, that it's smooth and efficient between us.
Right, and that we as a production department as a whole are really trying to keep the best interests of the production at heart. And
Yeah, because that's our goal.
how can, we all as different departments pitch in to help create this best world in which to present this production?
Yeah. And I think that's what we do. That's what we do. And we like doing it, and we're good at it. So there you go.
We learn every year, but we have learned a lot over the years.
You can't help it. So keep your mind open, because you're going to be learning lots of stuff as the world goes by and you decide how you want to address your career. Because this is a good career, let me just tell you that. It's a good career. And you can have all kinds of talent and all kinds of skills, and there's probably a place within theater and entertainment business where you can have a job. You could a painter, engineer,
Yeah.
carpenter,
Shopper.
There's all kinds of jobs and all kinds of trades that are supported by this huge industry.
Right.
And so don't overlook like learning trades, learning how to sew, learning how to drape, learning how to tailor,
Budget.
to budget.
Accounting.
Right.
We've said budget a lot today.
Yes, we have.
And we're redoing ours.
But it's important. I mean,
It is important.
It's not when you start out your career, that's not what you think. I want to be the best budgeter in the world. No, because that's not what it's about.
Well, no, but I think it's an important consideration, particularly for a designer, is how do I create the best world in which this production can happen and still work within the constraints of what I'm given?
Yeah. Being flexible and creative, I think, is part of what makes working in theater good. And if you can do that, then you can accomplish that goal.
Right.
Of getting what you want, what the audience, transporting that audience into that world, and knowing that you did it really well, and it didn't take $1 bazillion to do it.
One of the things I think is so important, especially with props and costumes, is that the artist actually has a relationship with what you're giving them.
Absolutely.
They have a contact, and some of them will derive character and part of their acting from the things that are in their hand, certainly the things they're wearing. And I think people often forget that. They say, oh, well, why did you spend that much time on that? Or why did you spend that much money on that piece? Well, the reason is because it's not only for the audience. It is actually to get the best performance from the actor or the singer. And what I love here is that so many times the artist will come down into the prop shop and thank us for making it look so good or making it work so well, where they've had problems with the same role and the same prop. And I love that part about my job, is that I try to make it the best it can be for their performance,
Right.
because that's what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
We're supporting that performance.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and what we do and how that contributes to character development.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it's not just us and props and wig and makeup, which actually come into physical contact.
That's
But
right.
with sets, you know, the ease of opening and closing
Doors,
doors, you know,
that's
there's
right.
all kinds of
Yeah,
stuff
that's right.
that you have to remember that's what it's
Right.
about.
I mean, you're helping create the world that these characters live and interact in.
Yeah.
And
And the audience wants that best performance, and
They
we
do.
want to provide it, and
Yeah.
that is part of what our process is.
Right, because they shouldn't be thinking about anything.
That's right.
Our job's to take away that worry.
After 41 years, I am still amazed at what the artists do on stage.
it's absolutely stunning. And
Blows me away still.
Yeah,
You know, they're watching the conductor, they're singing with the orchestra, they're working bread machines, they're walking in clothes that they don't walk in every day.
they're jumping off a parapet.
Or they're coming down a rake. I mean, it is pretty amazing what they do.
Yeah,
And that's why they're artists.
yeah,
and I think, you know, we're back to this takes a village. This is not
yeah,
this is not just one person in a empty room making this all happen.
yeah.
And I don't think any of the three of us is afraid to tell you how many people just in our own departments it takes to really make things happen. And
Yeah, and it does take a lot. And I think that's where we are. That's what we came to tell you, is that, you know, that this process it's a great thing to do. And we enjoy doing it.
absolutely. You know, thank you guys for joining us and listening to our musings and ramblings. I hope you've all taken some insight from what the three of us have had to share with you today. And keep asking questions.
Keep asking questions.
Keep asking questions. Y'all take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.